Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Belongg Book Club session. I just want to begin by saying a little bit about Belongg, and then we'll move on to today's session. So Belongg seeks to bring discrimination-free services and community experiences to people who face prejudice and bias for reasons of identity. So that could have to do with race, caste, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, ability, religion, etc. And we do a couple of different things. We have an inclusive housing program. We have a mental health collective as well as a research collective. In addition to these, of course, we have the book club and library, and that's the session that you're here for today. So that we can sort of keep having these conversations with authors who write on themes of identity, diversity, and inclusion, including Meena. So just before I introduce Meena, I want to say a little bit about the format of today's session. So we're going to begin maybe by having Meena read an excerpt from her book. And then I'll ask a couple of questions just to get the conversation going, after which, of course, you're all welcome to send in your questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. So yeah, I think that's all. Please make sure that you use that box to ask your questions and you don't try to use the chat. And I'll keep integrating them into our conversation. Okay, great. So Meena, just to move on to your introduction before we talk about your novel. So Meena Kandasamy is a poet, translator, and novelist who was born in Chennai and lives in London. She has published 2 collections of poetry, Touch and Miss Militancy, as well as the critically acclaimed novel, Gypsy Goddess. Her second novel, When I Hit You, was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2018. And her new novel, Exquisite Cadavers, was published by Context, an imprint of Western Books, in late 2019. It follows 2 stories. The main text features a young interracial, intercultural couple, Kareem and Maya, as they navigate love and discrimination in London, while the margins share the writer's process of writing about them. So that's a little bit about Meena and her book. And now over to you, Meena.
Thank you for that introduction. And thank you also to Belongg for hosting me and for Manjari for doing this chat today. Yeah, so I've not done a Zoom reading so far, so it's going to be a new experience for me. I'm basically reading from this book, the Indian edition, but I don't have copies, so I'm just going to go with the UK edition.
Yeah.
I'm going to read something basically from the margins. So the book is divided into a format where you have text on the margins and then you have the main text. So I thought, especially because I'm missing out on a Twitter storm today, which is about releasing political prisoners and stuff like that.
Right.
I thought, let me at least, think of that, or, make some talk about it by reading from the book. In the living room, the toddler is holding a colander in each hand and banging them together. Cedric seems to enjoy and immerse himself in this noisy invention.
Sorry, Meena, could you just be louder? Some people are saying you're not totally audible. So if you could just be a bit louder or use maybe earphones or something if that's better.
Oh, okay, sure. Wait a second. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, my text. Okay, this is better. Okay. In the living room, the toddler is holding a colander in each hand and banging them together. Cedric seems to enjoy and immerse himself in this noisy invention. I'm tempted to launch into a lecture on sensible parenting, but I stop short. They're happy. There's a train. That's going to be
This is classically London.
No, I just live right next to the track, so they're happy. That's all that matters. I don't have the time to play the role of an approval-seeking mum's-net mum. I try and tell him what I came to tell him. They arrested Rona Wilson. Who? Rona activist. Bang, bang. My Delhi friend, the political prisoner guy. Why do you have such a big smile on your face? He shouts. The child automatically lapses into silence, drops his improvised toy, closes his ears with the palm of his hands. Am I smiling? I'm not smiling. I'm just relieved, love, that they arrested him because they did not disappear him or kill him off in some dubious encounter. It's better this arrest than the false story of a shootout and shit. But do you know why? Plotting to assassinate Modi, they claim to have discovered a letter. I do a lot of air quotes for the sentences. What the hell? I know, fucking crazy. Fucking crazy indeed. Fucking crazy. Our little one squeals and walks back and forth, repeating this. Fucking crazy. The plot involves Dalits commemorating 200 years of victory at Bhima Koregaon, plus Maoists in the metropoles, urban naxos. A poet in Hyderabad, two lawyers in Mumbai, two civil liberties campaigners in New Delhi, one of the country's foremost anti-caste intellectuals in Goa, and an English professor in Nagpur. The French Marxist philosopher Balibar in Paris. This bunch of people, plus workers in Reliance, plus some others, coming together to plot to kill the Indian Prime Minister in a suicide attack. The plot is pot smoking, plus magic mushroom eating, plus your worst chemical trip, plus my epidural opioids wild. It's impossible to get 5 people on the left, in the same room, from the same little subsect, to agree on anything without 100-page polemical discussions, and here we are, being presented with an assassination plot spanning continents. The police must sleep more with the ultra-left, I tell myself. Diversify. Having spent my 20s as some sort of a far-left groupie, my insights are invaluable. So that's something from the margins, and then I could read something from the main text, maybe another chapter or something.
Sure.
Possibly some of it is, what does it mean, be under a repressive regime, stuff. This is in the last chapter. The things could go wrong, she knew, that she could not anticipate every outcome, irrespective of how diligently she mapped out evolving scenarios. She knew too. She had made a peace with chaos. Something more primordial than disappointment is chasing her down. She comes home from a late night weekend shift to a locked home, no sleepy-eyed Karim waiting with his coffee, no love notes scribbled on the whiteboard in the kitchen, an unmade bed giving away nothing. Panic seizes her, panic in the faded memory of her mother abandoning them without a word of farewell. Efforts at rationalization follow. Maybe he stepped out for cigarettes, coffee, the morning newspaper. This is totally unlike him. She charges her phone, calls him. There's no ringing, no answer. She calls her best friend who agrees to come over. A text pops up, possibly sent hours ago. Had to leave to Tunis urgently. Cannot tell you more. Please take care, my love. Will call soonest. Bisous. Tunis is where they had met, where they had lived the first year together, the only city she had taken herself to on her own. It's easy to place Karim there, equally easy to imagine how he would have slipped into the role of the dejected sophisticated upon touchdown at Carthage Airport. Karim with his dark blue blazer over his perennially wrinkled shirts, over his fading t-shirts, shoes whose style is ossified in time, with his wind beats and brown leather briefcase. Pacing up and down the living room, trying her utmost to avoid morbid thoughts, she can almost hear him begin this conversation with a total stranger. The films you watch are already dead. You bought them because you were being hassled, and it was your principal position to not turn away a young man hawking his wares, in the hope of making money to buy his first and only meal of the day. Your plan was to watch them over a lazy weekend in the comfort of your La Marsa home, the film a backdrop to the cold beer and the company of vagabond friends, and the creme briskly prepared by your grandmother from the morning's catch. People like you are why cinema started shutting down. People like you killed the film industry. Piracy killed our film industry. The regime killed our film industry. Our cinema is an exquisitely mutilated corpse today, and its murder was a meticulous, systematic process, replete with prolonged suffering, for sadism comes easily to all people. So yeah, I'm going to stop there and take
Right.
so we can discuss. Sorry.
Great. Amazing. So there's still one person saying that your voice is a bit faint, but if everybody could just increase the volumes on their computer.
Sorry. Is this better now?
Yeah, I think it's slightly better when you throw your voice,
Okay.
but it's fine.
Okay,
Yeah, if anybody had questions about what Meena read, we can sort of make them part of our conversation. Okay, so should we get started on the discussion part?
Yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, great. And if anybody has questions, please feel free to start sending them using the Q&A box. Let's speak about your decision to write in this form, where you've not only written in the main text, but you've also written in the margins. And I know in the preface, you talk a little bit about why you decided to do that. So if you could either talk a little bit about that, or maybe even read a bit from the preface that you, if you prefer doing that.
I think some of it is a stereotype, but some of it is also because for me it was a little bit of a challenge, you know. So obviously, you know, this was my fourth book that, you know, like I wrote myself. I mean, I'm speaking about When I Hit You. So I had done poetry before. I had done like another novel before, and I had done like loads of translations before, some 4 or 5 books of translations. So obviously, when you have this history of publication, people should know that, oh, maybe this woman knows what her book is about and what to call it, you know. But people were like, you know, and this is really even well-meaning people, like just going ahead and calling it a memoir. And I was like, but I called it a novel. Like, you could just respect that. And I was like, I'm not hiding that it's autobiographical in large part, that it's based on my life. But if I decide to frame the book a certain way, then I expect that, you know, you just don't classify that in the wrong genre. Like, you know, I mean, like, When I Hit You, some scenes of cooking, you don't put it in, you know, you don't call it a recipe book because there's food involved in it, you know.
Yeah.
So
It's okay. It's the past.
so no, it's between the train and the kids, and I choose the train. So yeah, so a part of it was like, you know, some of it is like how much are they trying to keep up what your work is, and also because I've been really very conscious in terms of, I think when you write without confidence, and you know, not confidence in the sense that I'm a writer or not, but confidence in the sense of will I be heard? Will I be heard the way I want to be heard? Am I the type of person who's allowed to speak? And you know, all of these other concerns that just go beyond the page, just go beyond the writing. Then there's this obvious other issue that, you know, you're grappling with, which is you don't want to be reduced to your autobiography. So you want to speak for things that are just beyond yourself as well. So the idea is that, and I was very conscious of this right from, you know, the poetry or doing other people's translation, and even my first novel. So then I thought that all of this becomes reduced to autobiography, and then it also means that people are not willing to, in a sense, give you the critical space that's required to be an artist, and, you know, not willing to cede you the fact that, okay, maybe writing this involved a lot of, you know, what I would quote unquote call process, as much as the fact that, you know, I was traumatized and therefore I want sympathy. And I think from a very outside of writing, from a very Marxist militant perspective, I don't want sympathy. You know, I think that what we all need in life is, you know, to change things. So there's this, you know, entire political perception of it, and, you know, all of these questions that I'm grappling with, but also in terms of so how do you say fuck you when somebody's doing this to you and, you know, reducing your work? So you're like, oh, I'm going to basically do this. So I'm going to kind of, you know, jot down every little inspiration and show people how it fits into a story, because obviously people have not got the memo that, you know, writers are inspired, but their writing, you know, involves process. It involves like, how do you take something and how do you make something out of it? Because that's where art comes in. Like, how do you take raw material and make that into a thing of beauty? And so even if it can be your trauma, and then you make something out of it, and it can also be, you know. So I basically started doing this book in a very obsessive manner, in which every little thing that, you know, was going into the book was going to be, which is also why it's a short book, because you can't carry on this, you know, experimentation for longer. And it's also the reason why it had to be a very tightly controlled experiment that I kind of wrote from November of 2000. Then my partner was away, and that's when I started writing it. So this is November 2017, and I finished writing it 5 or 6 days before I was going to deliver my second baby. So that was in 2000. When did I have my child? 2018. So yeah, it basically was a year and 1 year and 1 month of work on it in terms of writing. So, yeah. So
Okay.
that's I'm sorry.
Yeah. And I think you put it quite well when you say, and succinctly, you say, by describing it offhandedly and repeatedly as a memoir, some reviewers were sidestepping the entire artistic edifice that the work stood on with regard to When I Hit You, and were instead solely defining me by my experience, raped Indian woman, beaten up wife. So I find, like you were saying, the role of experience, inspiration, and process, and how they're in perhaps conversation and tension with each other very interesting. And here the role of the margins sort of really stands out to me. So at the end of your preface, you ask, have the margins always remained disciplined? Have they exhibited any tendency to respect my decision to cautiously separate the fictional and the real? And then a few lines later, you say, this book is the result of my journey of trying to find out. Come join me, dear reader. So you don't seem to have decided a priori at the very outset that you will succeed in making some kind of separation between the real and the fictional, but rather you seem to be calling it an experiment from the very beginning. So of course, I as a reader have my own sense of the degree to which it is possible to separate the two in this book. But I was wondering sort of what might be your finding with this experiment, so to speak. Sorry, you're on mute.
So the thing is, yeah, obviously I call it an experiment because when you call it an experiment, you're allowed to get away with failure.
Mm.
So yeah, there's no compulsion to be successful in it. It's like,
right.
The whole thing is the process. What's most important.
Yeah.
And the other thing is obviously, part of it is to say that a lot of things influence us, and a lot of things obviously. So if something, just going back to when I hit you, so if things happen to you, you're going to be writing about them, but writing is not just transcribing, writing is, transforming things and, like trying to fit everything into this narrative world. And naturally, so in this book, you really see how the narrative world is imagined, how it's, and how real world incidents start affecting people in fiction and stuff. But I also think that something about this process. So there's another aspect is that I don't think writing is glamorous, so you shouldn't glamorize it. So in this sense, a book like this is something that lays it really bare. Like, this is how transparent it is. Like, so you can see this is not some, I don't have any muse. I wish I had, like, or, some mystical process that makes me write. So it's also so straightforward for me. And I think part of it is laying that really bare. So for me, that was something. But the other idea is also that but also once you go into fiction, characters have their own lives, There's so much that you can feed into them, but then they also take control. And yeah, you start to step back and you start to observe them. So for instance, like when I started like the initial drafts of the book, the page was more like my inspiration would be 3/4 of the page, and little things would happen to Maya and Karim. So yeah, but I think that kind of changed. I think that kind of changed for when I realized that their life was bigger than my influences, and then I had to kind of shrink this column and let them breathe and have their own space. So yeah, I think that characters have this ability to tell you to push back, Meena, like if you want our space, we might be part of your experiment, but let's build our home. Let's do stuff.
Yeah. Let's take an audience question now. So, Grace Kumar Ramaraju says, how should one read the novel? Should one read the margin first and then the main text, or does it not matter?
I have a lot of provocative answers to this as well. So one of these things that you could do is never read the margin at all. Like, what should you know the writer's life? Like, what kind of morbid curiosity does it take to know who she is with, what she's doing, if her children are being fed well, and why is she making another baby so quickly? I think that, or what are her political, backdrop. Maybe you don't need any of that. Like, how do you read a novel? Like, what's a novel? Like, every novel is a story in which this margin doesn't exist. You just read the story suspended in its own life,
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, I don't think anybody can restrain themselves from, just taking a peek at the writer's life or trying to. I think it's quite interesting in terms of this connection between curiosity and the other. So it's possible that you just read the main text from one end to the end and read the whole story and then read the margins to see how it's worked in. Or you just read the margins. A lot of people seem to just like the margins and they read through the margins. And I'm like, oh yes, these are possibly the people who are on Instagram and, just consuming others' lives. So I just don't know. I think it's really left to the reader.
Yeah. I would say, I think the margins work really well. So the way I read it was that I would read the section that I thought corresponded to a certain number of margins, and then I would go back to the margins and read those. And sometimes the connection was so obvious, and at other times it was tenuous, but I think that's part of the project, right? And I thought it was a brilliant experiment because, like you said, it really, in some sense, de-glamorizes writing as well. Instead of having it be some sort of mysterious cerebral process totally removed from an author's life. And not to mention the fact that I think it allows readers to make some interesting connections between different contexts and histories and forms of violence, right? So when you speak of Tunisia and you're thinking about India, that allows us to make some of those transnational connections, which I think is, super interesting. And I haven't seen it be done quite like this before. So just to also let everybody who's tuned in know, this discussion will be available to listen to afterwards in case you missed the early part of the conversation. So it'll be on our YouTube channel, and you can check, maybe a couple of days from now. So I see we've got a couple of questions about the process of writing and things like that, but maybe we'll come to those after we've spoken about the book. So my next question was about the character of Kareem. Like you were saying, you also wanted to breathe some life into these characters and, give them their space. And Kareem is a fascinating character. So he's an immigrant filmmaker from Tunisia whose professors in London want a quote unquote Arabian film out of him. And so they embrace his work when they perceive it as some kind of authentic representation of his culture, but without any of the dangers that might be involved in pursuing stories from his homeland. So something you talk about again and again is the PREVENT program at universities and outside of universities and institutions as well, where people are overly concerned with the radicalization of Muslims. And so there seems to be both sort of a welcoming of his work as well as a recognition of the risk involved in the work that he does. So there's sort of a limit that's almost seemingly being set on his work. So how did you go about fashioning this character of Kareem, and how does it speak to your own experience as a writer in terms of what you are sort of allowed or not allowed to do in popular imagination?
I think the thing here is that when you're in, see the thing, I grew up in India, so, and I've been here for the last 3-4 years, so it's also a very strange dissonance of experience for me to call myself a person of color, because obviously I'd never call myself a person of color when I'm in India. To call myself an immigrant, to understand that, to start fitting into different categories just by the fact that you end up as at least in the beginning for a few months at a time. So you just don't know how you're fitting into this other thing. But then once you fit, once you're understood from that perspective, you also understand that there's very much a liberal attitude in which you have to stay in your lane. And I think that's a real problematic thing, because you are allowed to say South Asian women's stories, and that's it. So you can't write British lives. And I think that obviously there's a big question of cultural appropriation, which, has to be called out, whatever, engaged, things like that. But I think the other question is that why should we, all of us, be reduced to our own experience, and why? Because I also think it's very limiting in terms of solidarity. And for me, these are, broader political questions to call into account. And therefore, I felt that, this South Asian women getting beaten up was such a trope. And knowingly or unknowingly, people were consuming me that way, and there was a certain rebellion against it. And I didn't want to again write about myself, because people would be like, she just can't let go. So I was trying to find an equal parallel for me. And for me also, the other idea is that here Islamophobia is huge, just as it's very huge in India. Just, it's much more posh and sophisticated, but doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Talk about work, and this is a place where Karim's obviously talking about how people are have this idea of Tunis as sea, hijabi, glory, couscous. So one of that is obviously the fact that British tourists just go on holiday there. So Tunis is seen as this exotic holiday location, or that they just have a received idea of how Muslim women in the Maghreb are, and not a lot of them are actually hijab wearing at all. But that's not how imagination works. And then there's obviously the question of terrorism So obviously, there's this other question of terrorism, and how again, once you're from the Middle East and you're political, people are already going to think you're radicalized. And again, this is something I always grapple with, even in my own work, in terms of obviously Karim is a person whom you know I have been to Tunisia a couple of times. My partner's work has taken us there, so I have met loads of artists, other people, and for me to write about Tunis was also I was actually writing towards hope. The fact is, we are, in my opinion, living in what's an undeclared emergency. We are living in a lot of clampdown, lot of laws being suspended, and in a backdrop like this. To go talk about a country where there was a successful revolution, where people could overthrow a dictatorship that was very well entrenched, a deep state, and all of that was, very empowering. And the fact that artists and writers and, bloggers and singers and rappers were at the forefront of, being with the people and leading this kind of thing, very democratic, peaceful protest where people could use it. I think I was writing towards hope. And I really think that that's exactly why Tunisia was so inspirational for me to write about. So, and I think that's how Karim's character came about. But I also understand that, yeah, obviously, the question of filmmaking was a lot about commodification and art. And I'm sure the same thing is happening to us in the books industry in South Asia or in India, that kind of thing.
Yeah. This next question is from Shreya. She asks, Maya's race is not announced at all, save for a passing reference to her being mixed race. Why is that?
I think that one of the other questions that I wanted to explore here was the question of passing. So the fact is that she's somebody who passes for white, and therefore, I think with mixed race children, this is an issue. And sometimes you are light enough to. There's a lot of issue of colorism, for instance, in the US, and like what happens. And for me, the idea of passing for something was very important because today when we discuss. Today when we discuss things, we are like, who are you? Who are you exactly? I think this becomes this core of identity becomes very, very, very like almost a forensic, detailed probe. But I think that even in my own, experience of looking at my parents or people of the previous generations, I think passing was much more important and almost a survival skill. People would always like to pass off as something higher than what they were because they wanted society to just be lighter on them, kinder on them, easier on them. And I think for Maya, this was a crucial thing. So she was passing as white, and in that way, she is somebody who's, finds it easy in many circumstances, but she knows that she comes from a mixed race background, and that, the fact that, and this, the issue of, again, mixed race children for me is very interesting. One, from a very personal point of view, my partner is white, so we have mixed race children, but also a lot of British people sometimes make the most crazy comments. So we've had somebody come and tell us, oh, your son would be very good at football because mixed race children are good at sports. So, so we are like, and this guy then actually, this is a white old guy who said this to us, and then he said Lukaku, and Lukaku is not even mixed race, but it's like, so yeah, we face this kind of, everyday objectification, but also people are like, oh, the future is going to be all beige Britain, and, we're going to have this mixed race children are cute. So obviously there's that feeding into it, but also the idea is that mixed race children, unlike what people glamorize or call them cute or say they're good sports people or whatever eugenic shit that goes into it, I think at the backdrop, if you look at the number of children in care homes, for instance, children who are put into foster care, who are taken into social security, they're 4 times overrepresented than the average white child or the average black or brown child. I think it's because, that's how social fissures operate. And I think I really wanted to reflect a little bit of that mixed raceness of Maya, but also, obviously, since this was a real-time novel, you also had Meghan Markle, like the princess, who is mixed race, and you just realize that, either somebody passes for white, or the minute that their black identity gets fixed on them, then there's a certain crucifixion that happens to them and, attack from all sides. So for me, it was just interesting to explore that aspect of her character as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And let's speak a little bit about mixed marriages, which is certainly an important theme in your book. And through your book, you explore the personal, social, political implications of mixed marriage. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit about, what is this perceived danger, or what is the real danger of mixed marriages, not just in relation to race, but also perhaps in relation to caste in India.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think obviously one of the aspects of caste system, at least Dr. Ambedkar said this was, caste is through the control of women's sexuality, and, so unless they control women's bodies, they're not going to be able to go ahead and control the caste system. So women were called the gateways of the caste system in that manner. So I think there is, and again, what does it do? What does caste system do in terms of, being intercaste? So Manusmriti is full of these examples of what happens when a Brahmin fucks a Shudra and has a baby, what happens when a Shudra woman does this with somebody. So it's like all of these other castes, or what is Anuloma, what is Pratiloma, whom you're allowed to marry, and what's the sin of, this and that. So I think it's a very, very complex question, but also it's a question where it's a very urgent question as well, because you have what they call quote unquote honor killings, but you have so many killings of intercaste couples, especially where the girl happens to be caste Hindu and the man happens to be Dalit, just getting, killed and done away with. And it still happens. So yeah, we have to understand that mixed marriages are not easy in any social setup. And my own personal experience is that my father comes from a nomadic tribe. He was also the child of a mixed marriage, and my mother comes from a Shudra or a backward community, and they had a marriage. So the thing is that, at least personally for me, like my parents, my parents had never, told or shared their particular caste with anybody. Like my mom would have to do that because of litigation. But, just talking about it was seen as taboo, it was just seen as a very shameful thing to do, because they had, in their own way, surmounted the caste system. And you also realize that once you're a mixed race, a mixed, caste, or mixed race child, or whatever it is, your parents also have, like there's nobody from the larger family becoming part of your own family. You don't have this kind of, grandmother, uncle, large sibling relationships. Like you're invited to very few weddings in that sense. Like you're not marrying into your own caste again. So what's your caste? Like who are you in terms of your caste? I think all this is really, really very interesting question. Because it's a very liberating space, of course, because you're not oppressed the same way, or you don't have the same, filter and glasses. So at the same time, it's also just a very, very interesting space to inhabit.
Yeah. Great. So this next question is from Prem. Hello, Meena. Huge fan of your work. The personal spaces of the political is evidently an important part of your work. While in Exquisite Cadavers, you say that you consciously try to set aside the politics, explore the marginalia / main text of implicit / explicit politics. However, in the final chapter, Karim explicitly dives into a political mission, and Maya grapples with very personal questions. What led you to choose and explicate these political personal lenses at that point, at the end of the book, that is?
I think that Karim is very restless, right in the beginning, one, he wants to do something very political, and he's always asked not to do it because of, prevailing Islamophobia and not being, asked to share his work in the same way. So that's one of the aspects of Karim. And the other is that, so he is burning with, political questions he wants to ask and talk about, and doesn't get the chance to. And I think there's another thing is, when you're an immigrant artist, you obviously are much more concerned about what's going on at home. And when you're elsewhere, you feel, have I escaped it? Have I done the right thing? And you also feel very guilty because you're no longer at home. And I think that's something that gets explored through Karim. And eventually, I think the last chapter is his decision-making chapter, where even he leaves, but he's leaving because of a circumstance, a new development at home. His brother's been taken into custody. And so I think that's that aspect of it. And, Tunisia during the dictatorship, or the years following the dictatorship, was very much like India is today. Like you just get your friends arrested, your family arrested. So it's a bit like that. And so the other thing is, Maya obviously, is is aware of all of this, but then she also has to choose, I think, and I think politically it's always a question, isn't it? So are you just can't be a bystander, you have to make choices. So.
Yeah.
And I think it comes at the end of the book, I think also because fictionally it's like a good point to need to put there. Yeah.
Yeah. This next question is from Ria. I think you do have an answer to this. I mean, an answer is too sort of strong and cohesive a word, but I do think you respond to this in your book, but it might be worth clarifying. So Ria says, the rebellion against and reluctance to be consumed as a South Asian woman trope makes sense, but aren't the best works informed by our standpoint? So if you could maybe just clarify your position on that.
I completely agree. In terms of, I think what I want to do is obviously speak as a South Asian woman, but as a South Asian woman, I should be having the freedom to talk about global warming, climate change, about Boris Johnson, about austerity, about Donald Trump, But if it becomes problematic for me if somebody says, you're South Asian, therefore, can you just give us 10 points on how you can detect a husband who is abusive? So if people try to put you within a certain bracket and so what I'm resisting is not the, standpoint on, for instance, you're a South Asian woman, why don't you tell us about Hindu fascism? I would really welcome that opportunity. But I think if somebody says, if there is a commodification of the fact that you're South Asian and you see that you're being portrayed in a certain way to sell books or to sell something, then I think I have an issue there with somebody else deciding what I view the fact that I'm South Asian. So yeah, I believe that our standpoint can be hugely informative, but our standpoint can also mean that we should be at liberty to discuss other things in the world, capitalist crisis, the oncoming recession. These are not things that only white Marxists can decide, But there's always this kind of, even within, like, let's say the far left, this kind of place where, you have to stay in your lane, talk about things like gender, inclusion, diversity, and then you have, the white Marxists, talking about the big things, and I'm like, no, I want to talk about the big things too. Where I just don't want them to sideline me. So.
Yeah. Great. Thanks for that clarification. Okay, so to all our participants, if you have any more questions for Meena, please send them within the next 10-15 minutes. We've obviously still got a bunch to go, but just in the interest of being able to answer most of them, it would be great if you could send them. This next question is also from, it's from Grace Kumar, who asked a question earlier as well.
I like this Grace question. Yeah, can I see that?
Yeah.
Words and margins like Kadal, Kenjal, Kindal, yes, I have. Yadamure, Yavram, Kere, yes. How is it received among non-Tamil speakers? So they don't exist for me. No, I just don't have any clue. Many books are translated in French and German. I think they just leave the Tamil words in Tamil itself and they translate it. And because even when I use these Tamil words, I think most of them I'm trying to see that they can be worked out from the context. And otherwise, I immediately do provide an English translation. So if it's Yadamure, Yavram Keller, I think I've translated that as anywhere is home, everyone is kin. So that the next oncoming English sentence tells you what it is about. And was it deliberate not to give any reference to these words? No, sometimes I don't italicize these words because I don't think that they should stand out or they should be anything different. And I also think that, I write in general from a very Tamil woman perspective. So you get all the jokes if you happen to be Tamil, but there are in-jokes that I think only Tamil readers will understand and it would not work for other people. So yeah, I think the books are much more transparent to somebody who doesn't know the tongue and not that transparent to others. But it's not a necessity, I think, yeah. Even if you understand like 60% of a book, I think it works for somebody.
Yeah. I also noticed a couple of words in the book that are not Tamil words necessarily, but maybe you'd call them South Asian slang, I'm not sure. But essentially that you, I think you make the decision to not translate them. So for example, there's a part where you say dhak dhak, which is, I think like the beating of a heartbeat was what you were trying to say at that point in time. And I think I observed that at a couple of different places. I was wondering if that's an editorial choice that you make when you decide not to provide translations.
No, yes, I think that, for the heartbeat and stuff like that, no, I don't think I translated. Just let them figure it out on their own. So.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot we have to figure out on our own. So,
Yeah.
so it's only fair. Okay, yeah. So this next question is actually the first question we got, but I was saving it for the latter half of this conversation because it's about writing and publishing more generally, and that's what most of the remaining questions are about. So this question is from Sahana. She says, "Hello, ma'am. I would like to first say that I really admire your writing style, and your books leave me breathless every time I read them. As an Indian journalism student in the UK, I learned so much about media ethics from the Gypsy Goddess. I wanted to ask about your experience with literary agencies and the publishing industry in both India and abroad. How did you find the pitching, editing, and marketing process when considering that you write novels that mercilessly challenge existing power structures? Thank you for taking the time to read this." Yeah, so that's the question. Meena, you're on mute.
That's just the trains. I'm trying to not let London traffic disturb the audience. So I think the first part of this question is obviously when I wrote the Gypsy Goddess, and I was staying in the UK at that point, and I sent I think 11 or 12 pages to my agent, and he said it's absolutely brilliant, and he wanted to send it. He already wanted to sell it. And I was like, no, don't do that. And for me, my agent is like my parents or grandparents. He's the kind of person who loans me my rent if I don't have money. So it's really evolved into a very beautiful relationship over the years. And at the time, I was like, don't sell it. And he actually listened to me, because for me, the idea was that I was so afraid, and I'm still so afraid of the market. I was like, if I take any money for this book, then the market would decide how I was going to write it, So I was like, no. Then I would be forced to write a book that many people can read. I would be forced to write a book that would sell very well, a book that would be what they would call accessible. So, I was like, no, I don't want anybody's noises in my head. Like, this was what I was going to do. So it could be good, it could be bad, it could be a dismal failure, it could be all of this, but at least it was my own, So I just wanted to, so in the end, I finished writing the book, and then I said, oh, now you can sell it. And I think that, like even when they sold it, a lot of people would be just coming back and saying, oh, I would publish Gypsy Goddess if you take the first chapter out. And I was like, no, that chapter is the heartbeat of the book. You can't remove that chapter. So, you have to sometimes just let some doors close on you, because, this person doesn't get you. They may be great editors. And this was really, really one of the very best editors. But I'm like, I'm going to follow my gut instinct, because this is my book. I spent 6 years working on it. And so you cannot decide what goes out of the window. And I also think that in that sense, with editors, I allow them like 95% freedom in terms of, if they want to make a line edit, change a word or here or there. But then things I'm really doggish about, bullish about, like, no one can come there. So I stood my ground. And I also think that sometimes one of my editors, the one who's still, I'm still working with him, he told me, and he said this to me in an absolutely honest and very realistic perspective. He said that, people will start taking you seriously around the time you're writing your 4th or 5th book, Meena. And, when I actually heard that, it was a little difficult to hear that, because obviously I spent, minimum of 5 to 7 years in a book. Not everything is like the last novel, which took just, faster. And you realize that, if that's how much of your life you're putting into each book, imagine like that's about 20, 25 years from now, not bad. And
it's okay.
Sorry. on the one hand, this is disappointing. But on the other hand, I was thinking about this. So I don't think people would say that to, other, like would easily say that to young up and coming white women writers. For instance, they wouldn't say, "Oh, you people would take you seriously by your fourth book." Like as a white woman, they would be like, "Oh, so much promise, so much potential." Then they're not going to give you this promised potential. So you're like, "Oh, you have to wait for your 10th, fourth book, fifth book." And then I realized that basically that means that I am allowed to do any crazy stuff until it's like, and that's such a freedom, isn't it? Like no one's going to take you seriously means, oh my God, I can play. And I think that's exactly where I think my third novel came from, So it's like this book doesn't have to sell because anyway, nobody's going to take me seriously. So I'm going to do crazy shit that I thought like, 3 or 4 people would get this book, would sell 50 copies. So, this was where I was coming from. So for me, I was like, I just didn't care about how the industry was going to receive me. But of course, it turned out much better than expected. The book really sold well and went into a second reprint in less than a month and stuff like that. So, we were happy. We were happy with that, but that is not what was intended from our side. So yeah, I still struggle with it. So I'm not there where I can give you answers, but I can just share with you what's happened. So.
Yeah. Let me actually just ask a follow-up on what you said. So I was wondering if, you felt like you were free to do this experimental writing now that you are on, this is your, well, I mean, counting your poetry books, it's like the 5th or something, right? So
I think the UK would count more novels because I'm not published here as a poet. So possibly my 3rd book here. So
yeah.
I have 2 more chances to fail. So which I think is amazing because on the one hand you can be absolutely broken-hearted about it and say, okay, so it's going to take them a long time to sit up and read and receive what I say, and the other hand it's like, oh my God, that's just so much space, like.
Yeah. This next question is from Shreya. She says, your writing is overtly political in both When I Hit You and more so in Exquisite Cadavers. Have you had trouble with getting work published in India under the current regime?
No, I just think I'm an absolutely daring publisher, so I'm very lucky. No. I think you should read all the other books of context. Actually, they are really, really beautiful. Yeah. So yeah, I'm lucky. I think.
Great. Okay, that's hopeful. This next question is from Belle the Worm. They ask, when did you decide to pursue a career in writing? I'm sure a lot of people would be curious about that and whether it was a conscious decision or not.
Well, my initial decision was not to pursue a career in anything. So yeah, I just wanted to be, absolute vagabonding around. So no, I think I was teaching at Anna University in Chennai, and I had just finished my PhD. So, my parents were both academics. So there was this whole idea that I should be an academic myself. And I still remember very clearly. So this was like 15th of October or 14th of October something, and I'm going into the classroom. I was telling the students, open up this page and look at this paragraph number 6. Look at the second letter there, and this is how you write a letter, and to the editor or whatever, and this is what it contains. And they realized like 5 minutes afterwards that I was not using a textbook, and I realized that I was becoming an automaton. Like I could just go into a classroom and
Yeah.
And I was like, this is not what I wanted to do with my life. Like, I absolutely love teaching students, absolutely feel amazed, like even if you can make very marginal increments in their lives and, like put little bits of revolutionary thought in them. But at the same time, I just wanted to rescue myself, and I thought a university is such a safe space. It's like a cocoon, like if you go there, you're going to fit very nicely, but you're just not going to get hurt out in the world so nice. Like, I resigned that job in like a week or 2 afterwards, after I came to this great moment of revelation to me, and I was like, I'm going to struggle, but I'm going to be outside any system. And I think that's when I realized it's just less realization than just practical life. So I had to keep writing or doing stuff that was going to feed me. So yeah, writing became the default choice.
Yeah. This actually seems...
That's what I do.
Sorry, could you just repeat the last thing you said?
No, I wouldn't call it. I wouldn't call it a career. That's just the only thing I do. I think so.
Right.
I don't know what's
This actually seems like a good moment to bring up one of my favorite lines in the margins of your book, where you say that your mother would hurl certain words at you, at your teenage self, calling you a riffraff, vagabond, loafer. And that certainly speaks to what you say about, you kind of just wanted to chill. And you say that it never gets better than riffraffing and vagabonding and loafering. All of that also gets some writing done.
No, I think that part of no, for me it was not about chilling actually. No, I never chilled. I never chilled. I never visited. I don't know, like a pub until I was 25 or 26. No, I don't think so. I think for me the idea was just to reject the structure. So my idea was not do what was expected of me, but do other stuff. So I spent like all my teenage years. I don't remember sleeping a single night. I would just sit up and do translations. So I would work all through the night and then go to bed around 8 in the morning. So for me, the idea was I just don't do what other people are doing or what's expected of me to do. Normative teenage stuff. So, and yeah, my mother, of course, is lots of things. She thinks all my poems are vulgar. So she doesn't read them. I think moms are great, great that way because to just don't give you any self-confidence boost. They absolutely like to be told all they love and their approval and expect you to go there.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, Amma, I understand what you're doing there, but I'm not going to let you manipulate me. So I'm like, oh, you call me vagabond. I'm so proud of that.
Right. This next question is from Preeti Nangal. She says, could I ask what your relationship with language is as a writer? Do you, like an Indian writing in English whose first language is different, face any sort of dissonance while writing in English? Does it hamper your creative process where you are thinking in another language and writing or expressing in another? How do you engage with this creative, intellectual, imaginative, quote unquote gap? And does it affect your characters and subject matter at all?
So yeah, I think I'm a Tamil woman who writes in English, and I think I'm going to stick with that because obviously Tamil cast law not only shadows. I think Tamil is very essential, intrinsic part of who I am and how I think and how I behave. And I think even when I reject something, even if I reject aspects of Tamil culture, that's still the culture against which I'm militating. So that culture informs me, and obviously this has issues in the way I write in English as well. So and I realized that myself many years later. So for instance, in my first novel, this is this wonderful first chapter where you have this long conversation with the reader, and I'm like basically stepping up on the annoyance level, and I think that to kind of annoy somebody and flirt with them is a very Tamil thing. Like I don't know if I can translate it. You just have to. You really have to do that little dance with the Tamil person, like you say mildly inoffensive shit, and you fake your anger at the other person. So I think there are all of these little, you have to get upset at your lover, you have to fight with your lover. So these are things that you just can't have a smooth relationship means there's no love. So you just have to get angry that they're not paying attention to you. These kind of little aspects of how you negotiate the world. And I think this idea of what it is to be Tamil, of course, changes for every other Tamil. I'm sure there can be another Tamil person who comes and says, Meena is making all of that up. That's possibly just hair. That's not Tamil. But I think that, yeah, all of this does feed into you. And it also does feed into your perceptions of relationships. How do you? Yeah, so I think it does do. But I also think that's also the only reason I write. I think because that way, when you come from another language or another background, whatever you write, even if it's in English, I think is very different from how an English British novelist would write it. So like an English novelist would write it. I think so. Yeah, I think adds another layer to your writing, to your understanding of the world.
Yeah. Our next question is, who would you call your inspiration out of Indian fictional authors? That's a tough question.
That's a good question, actually. Mm, so I love Arundhati Roy. Obviously, so when I read her first novel, this must have been when I was 18, 16, 17, still in school. So yeah, we would all sit on a bench and read it aloud because she was doing absolutely marvelous work with language. And so yeah, I think I find her amazing. I also consumed a lot of R.K. Narayanan when I was a kid. R.K. Narayanan when I was a kid, and I think he's a great storyteller. A lot of Brahmanism, lot of very very problematic stuff there, but at the same time, this man could tell a story. So, and you also realize that when you're a kid reading a book, I think at a very young age, you're still not really aware of everything,
Yeah.
and it's much older that you learn to unpack these writers. So, like I think I'm not somebody who's ashamed to say that as a kid as a teenager I liked a lot of Shobadi's work. But I still I think I like Anita Nair's work. I also used to love every single column that she's written. I think he got some fabulous writers, and it's also a very difficult question because you see I got a
Yeah.
very bad memory problem. I think I like a lot of writers. And I also think that, unlike a lot of people, I have many, many differences with Chetan Bhagat. But this guy was making teenage videos. So he was the only guy that my students were reading like even 10 years ago. And I was like, at least he was putting a book into someone's hands. And I was thinking that if somebody was going to read a few sentences in English because of this guy, that's good. So yeah, this is not an inspiration, but for me, the fact that people were even in a country where literacy was low, but also reading as a habit is seen as something that only privileged people do. That if somebody could break that and let anybody read, I think that was empowering. So yeah, my political self is very different compared to the fact that I have a very big threshold on in terms of who is read and what reading means.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a request for you to be just a little bit louder.
Oh,
Uh,
sorry.
no worries.
Mhm.
Then this next question is thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us. My question is this: can you please take us through your drafting and editing process? What does your writing timeline or schedule look like? Do you have a timeline or schedule?
No, I think each book takes its own time because with Gypsy Goddess, I think I started to work for it around 2006-7, and when I gave the first draft, it was 2012 October. So I think it was about 6-7 years, and yeah, and then I spent about 3 months, 4 months working on the editing itself with my editors.
Yeah.
And, so yeah, so that whereas I think when I hit you, I started just making notes about it in 2012, but I got around to writing it in 2015 and 16, and the book came out. No, in 2014 and 15, I took 2 years to write it on and off. So I don't only write all the time. So I do other stuff like I read a lot, or I write op-eds, or I translate. So writing is not the only thing I do. So yeah, obviously the timeline is different, and I think motherhood also plays a big role in writing. So since I've had children, I find it incredibly difficult to even write anything more than a tweet. Yeah. all my literary creation at the moment is just on Twitter. So yeah, it's quite an interesting in terms of what happens to writing. But I think each book requires its own time. It requires its own space.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm actually wondering if you think there's something different that happens with writing in the age of social media, when social media has become so mainstream than when it did perhaps when it was less mainstream.
Uh, what happens to writing in the social media? Yeah.
Yeah, now that we have social media to talk about that writing and to also have writers sort of have their personas in public, right?
Yeah, I still think that social. I don't know. I can share my experience. I cannot reflect in general about others. But for instance, I have a Twitter feed and I tweet, and but I think that people who follow me on Twitter are far more political. I don't think I am connecting. Like a lot of people say, I connected my readers on Twitter. I think I connected my readers maybe like once in 4 months or something like that. Like I come across the reader. No, really, really, I don't think I find any engagement in terms of. I think a lot of the engagement is about political stuff. So yeah, people are there to follow political content and or
Yeah.
what's happening in terms of dissent or oppression or atrocity or arrest or something like that. So I don't find that social media directly leads to, like, I think also sometimes when publishers are completely like there's like 100,000 followers, and I'm like, no, you just don't know my followers. So you're gonna think it's about 100,000 books sold. No, I don't think I can push 10 copies to my Twitter feed. Please, these people are not the ones who are going to buy books. I think those who buy books are some nice aunties who I never meet anyway. But I just don't know. I don't think I have a connection with the reading demographic. Then it's quite, it's not every day that I come across them. Sometimes I do. I think increasingly I do come across one or two of them. But yeah, these worlds are slightly removed for me in my case.
So this next question is rather heavy. So, take a stab if you feel like you can. But this question is from Dhruv. He says, how does a militant writer resist cognitive capitalism and the information fetish in the publishing industry? Do you have any responses to that?
I think that, thank you, Dhruv, for your question. I think one of the things that I think to myself is obviously, how do you write under capitalism? And so what capitalism does to you is that it expects you to create commodities that you can sell. So obviously you are as valued by the system as how much you can sell. So one of the ways to push back against that is by writing stuff that you honestly believe are good but cannot sell. So, but also, how do you? It's not as simple as just that, because you just write, like type the word ABC all over and ask somebody to publish it now. No, I think some of it is like what's the politics of your books? How militant are they? How anti-state are they? How anti-capitalist are they? So I think a lot depends also on the content and how do you criticize capitalism within the context of your literature. And but also, I think there are two other aspects to this. One is also the nexus between all this. I'm very sorry to say this, but because obviously I'm somebody who is honest enough to admit that if you get shortlisted for a prize, it's great. It does great things to you. It gives you immense amount of exposure. Thank you very much, because you still want people to read your books at the end of the day. But at the same time, you have to be really aware that a lot of prizes are run by hedge funds in the UK, and these are people like rich bankers and like people who are running things for profit, who want to get any mileage out of having a progressive face. If they sponsor a prize, they just want a more progressive face. Oh, this is a prize for writing. This is a prize for that writing. And then obviously, you have to realize that you're still operating under this rubric and this framework, and try your best not to get co-opted or try to still use their platforms to deliver your very subversive messages. So. And I'm sure the same thing is happening in India as well, in terms of some of the festivals, for instance, run by Tata and others. And then you realize that, these people have a very bloody history. So what did this group do in Karimnagar? So how, people's protesters, they basically had their hands cut off in Orissa. So, and these people are today talking about freedom of expression, like. So you realize that sometimes they're using all of these using literature as an artifact for whitewashing their own corporate crimes, and then that's when I think you should, even if you do appear on their platform, you call them out, because that's your social responsibility. But also you call them out in the pages of your book if you can pull it off. At least I'm that type of writer. So
yeah. We're gonna need to stop taking new questions now, but let's answer the ones that we have. Yeah, we can definitely answer the ones that we have already. we have the time for that. So this question is from Chris Kumar again. They say, let's say you create a new category to catalog exquisite cadavers in the bookstore. What would it be?
No, I wouldn't create a new category. I just call it experimental literature, which my editor told me that if you use the word experimental, a bookseller would not touch it with a harsh pole. Said that word just puts off publishers. Because especially people in bookshops, because they can't sell it. But I think it comes in terms of it comes in a long history of books which follow a similar format, or follow the similar breaking down of structures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's another question that says, yeah. Do you want to read that out?
Can we expect translation? I don't think so. I don't know, because nothing has happened so far. So if it happens,
yeah, perhaps it's too soon to tell, but it would be great if that is possible. Yeah. This is a question from Shreya. She says, you talk about your mischance of acting in an Odia, I'm not sure how to say the director's name, film in the margins. So maybe if you could relate that incident and then answer the question, which is, would you consider acting if another opportunity came your way?
Oh, no. No, I'm very happy to not try anything beyond writing. But yeah, I think one of these things is why I put that in the film is because obviously this guy put it in the book is because this guy is a filmmaker, and I wanted to talk about my own history of cinema, or so if for those who read the book, I grew up in a house in which all films were banned. So for me, the film was like, some commodity. I was obviously growing up in Madras with, films everywhere else outside my house. And in India, in a larger framework where we have a very filmy culture, but then I had a house where, no, you don't talk about movies, you don't think about movies, you don't have a TV. So yeah, I'm still angry with my father about that. So I think that this happened because I think there was a casting director who reached out and said, we need somebody to say these lines, and we just think that, you could do this. And it was quite interesting for me. So this is, I watched a lot of, you say his name Odia, I think, whatever French pronunciation, because my boyfriend is French. So the two of us would watch a lot of his films, And so when this actually happened and somebody was asking me to audition, I was like so happy. Also because it was a film based on, what's happening in Sri Lanka at that time. So, but there was no way I could go. And in some ways I thought that, when you have a great chance in your life and you just can't take it up, it doesn't matter if that's with cinema or acting or writing or anything, even love, especially love. If something doesn't happen, you just live in the dream of what if it had happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, there was this aspect of, oh, I missed this chance in my life. And I think it's almost much sweeter when you miss chances, because then you can be like, oh, you just have some little sad heart to carry, just life should have its own share of, very sweet disappointments. So I think that's all about it. So.
Yeah. And there was something, I think, in your book also about how it was, I guess, the visa regime that you were under that sort of prevented you from seizing that opportunity to some extent.
Oh, yes, I think there is I think that kind of visa problem still exists for, writers of color. So people from India, especially. So I was staying in London, and it's about usually the Eurostar to Paris is 3 hours, if you happen to have the right visa to travel. But the Schengen visa is that if you have to go to France and, you're staying here on a traveler's visa, not a student visa or a spousal visa, but on a traveler's visa, you have to go all the way back to India to get your visa done. So it's just the most complicated process. And I just wanted to, of course, tease that out as well. So
yeah. Great. So now we're at on our.
all the questions. I think we're coming to the end of the program.
Yeah, we have one question remaining. Yeah, so this question is, could you please talk about your next book? I wait with a bated breath for all of your work, and I'm very excited to know what your next work is going to be about and when we can get our hands on it. So if anything is in the pipeline.
No, not yet actually. Um, yeah, I think that I'm thinking of something, but at this moment, I think the fact that we've had a lockdown means everything
Mm.
in our life comes to a standstill. So I just used the time that I had to, for a long time, for April and a lot of April, part of March, I was just looking at the news all the time, like everyone else. I couldn't read, I couldn't write. I was in this limbo, and then in sometime in May, I think I got the time to revise an old essay that I had been carrying with me since 2013. So, and that's a 10,000 word essay, so that's
Mhm.
possibly where my next writing is going to be. And yeah, 10,000 is still, I think, a solid work. It's not a
Mhm.
book, but yeah, that's what's coming out next. If you're curious about it, it's coming out in the, I think, in the White Review. If yeah, I hope inshallah everything goes right. That's why it's coming out. So that's all I did.
Right. Okay, great. So we're at the end of our session. Is there anything you'd like to say before we close up, Meena?
No, no, I'm thankful to everybody who came. It's nice to be able to do book related events because I couldn't do them in person. So it's nice to meet all of you here, even though
Yeah.
I can't see you. But yeah, thank you for coming and thank you for staying. So
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us. And we really had a great time talking with you, Meena. And hopefully we can see you again soon and that we see all of our participants soon. So thank you to everybody and have a good evening.
bye, bye, Manjari. Take care.
Bye. Take care.